everybody's Thanksgiving was awesome, and now we're back with a teensy bit of baseball news. I was ready to open the show with like, hey, Aram, what happened in the baseball world? I saw Yamamoto was at a Laker game, and then Mike Trout was getting soaked in the rain of that Eagles-Bills game in overtime yesterday, which was a great game, by the way. But now we've got Kenta Maeda, and I forgot we had to hit on that Eugenio Suarez trade that took him from Seattle to Arizona. And we are going to start with our season in review, and we're incorporating MGM lines. BetMGM put out, win totals for every team in Major League Baseball. We picked those like 2 days before the season started. We're going to revisit that, see where teams finished there. As always, presented by BetMGM, Jack and Aram. How was Thanksgiving? I know we can get into the holiday of Thanksgiving if we want, but I know it was a really quiet last 5 days on the baseball front.
Yeah, it was interesting because we were getting that recording in just before the holiday. Peter and I did that on Wednesday, and then we put it out on Wednesday. And legitimately, the second we hit stop on the record button, that Suarez trade went down. And I'm like, watch, nothing else is going to happen for the rest of the time until we record again. Fortunately, this Maeda deal went through a little bit before we hit record. So that part of it is interesting. I do think that there's almost this agreement that just you're not going to bother other teams too much or agents too much over the Thanksgiving time, even though these folks are psycho usually, whether it's front office folks or agents. But I think there's almost just this agreement to just lay low. And I feel like things are going to really get popping next week because we got the winter meetings right around the corner. And then, of course, on the other side of the holiday. But Thanksgiving was nice. With nothing happening, it was even easier to put the phone down for a little bit and just know, hey, you're probably not missing anything. Enjoy family, watch some football. And it's exactly what I did.
Can I say the college football on Friday and Saturday was freaking excellent.
Yes.
I had a great Friday and Saturday. And the NFL on Sunday has been pretty solid too. I spent Thanksgiving in the DR. That was tail end. I flew back on Thursday. And I'm telling you guys, if you do get the opportunity, go do that at some point. The Dominican Winter League Litem. That was so much fun. I hit 4 games. I went to La Romana for Toros del Este, and I saw Ronnie Simon, the Rays prospect, and Yermin Mercedes in the same lineup. After that, I saw 2 games in Santo Domingo. I saw the Tigres de Licey. Miguel Andujar was on that team. Francisco Mejia was on that team. I then saw Jose Ramirez make his Litem season debut with Leones de Escogido, which was amazing. And then went to San Pedro de Macorís to see Estrellas, which was so much fun. Miguel Sano was in that lineup. I saw Junior Lake play down there. But you roll up to the ticket office at 9 a.m. the morning that you want to go to the game. You wait in the line, you buy the tickets, then you come back and it's either that or you get burned by scalpers, but still it's very funny. And there's live bands for every game and the baseball's good. And tell you what, in that weird lull of pre-Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving where there was no baseball news, and the biggest thing we got to talk about is Eugenio Suarez going to Arizona. That was the best thing I could have done to scratch my baseball itch. I had a great time, and I highly recommend anybody that can do it should do it.
Hey, you got that Junior Caminero homer.
Yeah, I did see Caminero.
That was awesome. I was going to say that's the only place I think on earth that you're going to be able to get Junior Caminero and Neftali Feliz in the same ball game. I would have said that until we got this Saudi league. Now it's any nostalgic name you want, you're going to get that thrown in there with whatever this sport is. But that side of it's fun too. I mean, for those sickos that really can't wait to have baseball back, you can go watch Bartolo Colon get Robinson Cano to roll out to second base, or hit a 6-run homer.
Yeah, or you can watch Pablo Sandoval hit a 6-run homer, which was crazy. And the strike zone was very favorable to Big Sexy, I will say. I was the weirdo that woke up and did watch that game.
Well, the craziest thing is Pablo Sandoval is in better shape for what is it? What is this called again? It's Baseball
United, and it's
United. Okay, that's what I thought.
League, yeah.
He's in better shape for Baseball United than he was in year 1 of his $50 million contract with the Red Sox, or was it more than that? I don't even remember what that deal was.
I think it was
more. Was it 80? Was it 100?
thought it was 80 or 90, maybe
I'm
100.
outing myself on this one. I didn't even remember. I just remember it being bad. I didn't remember how much it was, and I just remembered him not finishing that contract.
They went
Pablo
through a
Sandoval.
crazy stretch where it was horrible deal for Hanley Ramirez, horrible deal for Pablo Sandoval, and then the Rusney Castillo deal before he even debuted.
How about the Carl Crawford deal?
Yeah, that was not
Adrian Gonzalez. The Dodgers bailed them out of a couple of those. I'm going to try to dig up what that contract. Oh, 5 years, 95. Goodness gracious.
Yeah.
It was worse than I thought it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's in better shape than he was for that deal. He's only 37. It's crazy.
He's
got absolutely
time,
crazy.
Man. He totally has time. Eugenio Suarez, let's jump into that right now. That was a fun deal that went down on Wednesday. And do you have the exact return for Eugenio Suarez?
Yeah, I can get that to you in 1 second here.
Yeah, it's Suarez from Seattle to Arizona. And I like it because, Evan Longoria was a great stopgap this year, and he was so important. And we've heard Walker Buehler say, hey, they may not be in the position they were in the World Series if not for Evan Longoria's, maybe clubhouse presence.
Yeah.
Suarez is better than Longoria in 2024 and in 2023. This guy was a salary dump from Cincinnati. He goes to Seattle. He hits 1 billion home runs, and he's going to go and be a middle of the order power threat for a team that did lack that at points this year. I know they went to the World Series, but this team hardly snuck in, and they get a good bat to play a serviceable third base.
Yeah, and they parted with Sebi Zavala, the catcher, who's going to just kind of slot in a backup catcher, replace that Tom Murphy role for the Mariners. And then Carlos Vargas is the intriguing guy. He's a younger, hard-throwing arm, just turned 24 years old. And I think they're hoping they can, the Mariners are hoping they can maybe turn into, a high-leverage bullpen arm. He can run it to triple digits frequently, sits like 98, 99, heavy fastball. So I think that's the intrigue, but it was mostly a salary dump, quote unquote, on the Mariners end, which is interesting. It's just $11 million. It makes sense for both sides though, because we saw the Mariners, they recently went out and got Arias. I don't think that he's going to be able to replace that production. I know Suarez wasn't awesome, but I think he, can give you a little bit more than what you got last year, especially now going to Arizona. And I'll get to that in a second. But if they don't, I'm assuming the Mariners are positioning themselves and reshuffling some money around to be able to, I guess, commit money to another position, another area. But if you're swapping out Suarez for Arias, who they just got from the Red Sox, that's not great. Where is this money going is kind of the question, because, and I know they're not just cutting payroll. I feel like this is a reshuffling of financial assets.
Yeah. So my first thought when that happened was, I have a soft spot for Luis Arias. I don't know why, but I was like, oh, Luis Arias, this guy's been DFA'd twice at this point. So you cannot roll him out as your opening day third baseman. My first thought for Seattle was, okay, they're positioning themselves for a go at one of Matt Chapman or Jeimer Candelario. And I still think that's going to happen. I would lean Candelario for Seattle because I think they may want to make several moves, and they don't have, frankly, the funds and the space to make 2 big ticket moves. And Chapman looks like a big ticket move.
Yeah, no, it looks like he's going to be 9 figs.
It's insane. And Chapman's a fascinating one based on the tea leaves that I've kind of gathered on Cubs Twitter, and just news Twitter in general. Have you seen the Bichette thing? I think if they don't go and trade for Bichette, they sign Chapman and a pitcher. Like, the Cubs are going to spend huge in the next week and a half or 2 weeks. Yeah. I feel very strongly about that.
I agree. In my mind went immediately to Candelario too. I figured Chapman, same thing, kind of not in that price range for them. Yeah. Candelario is not going to be cheap either, but it's more in their range. And if they cleared out that 11 for next year, they can backload the contract a little bit too if they wanted to. I think that makes sense. So for the Mariners, it's a wait and see. I expect them. They're always busy, right? Jerry DiPoto loves to trade. So they could make another trade. They could end up being I think they could be positioning themselves to take on a contract that maybe isn't terrible, but isn't the most financially desirable. And maybe that's a way that they can work out an acquisition for another position. So there's a few different ways that they could approach it. And I think just trading Suarez gives them the ability to do that. And then to tie a bow on the Diamondbacks point, I think Suarez is somebody that could end up really enjoying a nice little uptick in his offensive production, just getting out of Seattle. I know his home road splits were pretty consistent for the most part, but actually kind of reverse, which is weird. He actually hit better at home, but I just think in general, you get him in Arizona, he's gonna be playing more, in Colorado, and I think that's something that's just going to bode well for him. So as a guy that drives the ball in the air, I think it was probably good to just change a scenery kind of guy for him. So I'm excited to see what Suarez does out there. Just 32 years old. If it doesn't work out, it's just a 1 year, $11 million deal. And if you look at the free agent market, I'd sign Suarez for that in 2 seconds because everybody else is going to get more than that.
Yeah. Did you see the Diamondbacks ticket plan that they put out?
Yeah.
Dude, $299 for all 81 home games. A team that just went to the World Series, you can go see them for $3.70 a game. That's the best deal I've ever seen in my entire life.
Yeah, that was one of those where I was like, what's the catch? There's got to be some sort of catch.
Where's the catch?
But there's not.
Is it a nosebleed? I'll pay $370 for a nosebleed, no problem.
Yeah, that's one of the best deals in baseball. I hope Diamondbacks fans show out because the team's fun. They earned it, and they're making some moves, right? It's not the biggest deal in the world, but they're adding to the payroll, and I think they're going to make more moves. So I think this is just one of the first things that they're going to do, and I think there's more to come.
Who did they lose on a team that just went to the World Series? You know what I mean? Like this team has the ability to continue to level up. Man, if I was living in Phoenix, I would just split it with another person. I'll be like, hey, each of us drop 150 on this, and I'll go to 40 games and you go to 40 games.
That's crazy.
Amazing.
It's a no-brainer. It's almost like my Miami Hurricanes. They can't get anybody to show up to the football games. It's like buy one, get 2 free. You split that with somebody. You've got like 3 tickets to every game now for the price of like nothing. So there's some teams that are just willing to do that because they just want to get you in the door. And I get that. And hopefully people go in the door. They need to renovate that stadium. The roof doesn't even properly work. And I know that's a whole thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm excited for the future out there. And hopefully fans will take advantage of that deal.
Yep. We're going to get to the season grades in a moment for NL East teams. But first, Kenta Maeda to Detroit. 2 years, $24 million. Heyman had it first. 35-year-old Kenta Maeda. And Passan, I think, added some good color to it in his, tweet kind of breaking the Kenta Maeda news. The Tigers have been, what did he say exactly? All over the mid-level pitching market. Detroit has been all over mid-tier pitching. And the 35-year-old Maeda stays in the American League Central. Yeah. Who is Kenta Maeda in 2024? I saw that the physical is Monday. That's going to be a really intriguing physical. I'm curious what comes of it. If Kenta Maeda can give them 140 innings at a high 3s, it's absolutely worth it. I just wonder if that's still in the cards for Kenta Maeda. What do you think?
I think it can be, man. I thought he looked pretty darn good this past year, just being healthy and being back. There was a couple starts here and there that weren't the best, but in terms of just kind of inflating the ERA, you had a couple blow up outings, one particularly against the Yankees where I think it was like his 3rd or 4th start back. He gives up 10 earned runs. But other than that, I mean, he was pretty consistent and pretty good. And you look at the end of season line, I mean, you take that for what the cost is presumably going to be, assuming he passes a physical. 4.23 ERA in 104 innings. He punched out more than 10 per 9, walked just 2.4 per 9. That'll play. And what's interesting to me is this guy's become more and more of a fly ball pitcher. And this past season was, I think, more of a fly ball pitcher than he's ever been. Only a 32.6% ground ball rate. You put him now in Comerica, that bodes really well, right? He's going to just be able to get away with a lot more and not give up nearly as many home runs. That was the one thing that kind of bit him even last year with some success. 104 innings. He gave up 17 bombs. The last time we saw him in 2021, very similar, 106 innings, he gave up 16 bombs. So if he's able to cut that down a little bit, that ERA gets to the high threes, which is what a lot of the underlying numbers had him at anyways. Expected ERA 3.77, FIP at 4 flat, xFIP below 4.
Yep.
This could be a sneaky good signing. 2-year deal too, so you have some time that maybe by 2025 you're competitive. If not, and he's throwing well, you can trade him with another year of control at a pretty low AAV. If your team's not playing well, you can cash in and get probably a decent return for Maeda. We saw how surprising sometimes the market is, even for these guys on, in their mid 30s, if they're throwing well.
Yeah, it was relieving to see 2 years, 24. I thought it was going to be something like 2 years with a 3 as the front number. Like if it was 2 years, 34, or 2 years, 35, I would, tense up a little bit and I'd say, ooh, are we sure Maeda's worth that much? But 2 for 24, that feels very Mark Melanconi. And we saw Arizona do that. They would sign these guys, they would flip them at the deadline. And I think a 2-year deal is way easier to convince a team than just a 1-year rental. And it, helps you return tenfold. Maeda, I think it's funny. I was just looking at the AL Cy Young voting in 2020. I know a long time ago, but Maeda finished second behind Shane Bieber. But AL Cy Young voting in 2020 went Bieber, Maeda, Hyunjin Ryu, Garrett Cole, Dallas Keuchel, Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito. What a weird fever dream of a year. Is Maeda going to finish second in Cy Young voting? Absolutely not. I just wonder, he threw 104 innings this year?
Yeah.
What's the max inning output? Is it 140? Is it 110? I don't know. I hope it's 140.
Yeah, that's a great question because we saw a different Maeda last year. Nate Maeda, that in terms of pitch usage and stuff like that, I mean, he threw a split finger more than pretty much anything else. I mean, he threw a splitter, if you look at Savant, 32% of the time, which when we saw him in 2021, he was throwing that splitter, I think around 20 something, 25, 26% of the time. But the difference was he was mixing in a lot of different pitches. Like it was really splitter, slider, 4-seamer, those 3. That's all you're getting. And a lot of stuff high in the zone. So I think it's interesting the way he's kind of tackling it and the way he's pitching in terms of his usage. I don't know if it's conducive to 180 innings, 190 when you're throwing your splitter more than any other pitch. But we've seen some guys rely on 1 to 2 pitches that aren't fastballs heavily and have success. But at his age, with the history at this point, I think you're gunning for 140. And if you get that at $12 million, I mean, that's a no-brainer.
How do you feel about this on opening day? Tarek Skubal, Kenta Maeda, Matt Manning, Reese Olson, Casey Mize.
I mean, it's interesting. It's not bad. There's a level of intrigue there, but I think Maeda adds some much needed consistency because you can have some blow up starts from some of those guys. You don't know what you're going to get from Casey Mize. Matt Manning is a roller coaster ride. Skubal's great when he's on the field, but he's been banged up. So yep. I think just being able to have somebody that you can pencil in for a low 4s, you're hoping high 3s. I feel decent about that rotation because it does have the potential to be pretty good. If Manning looks like he looked, through his good stretches that we saw, and Skubal is the Tarek Skubal we know he can be. And if you get anything from Casey Mize, if he's a 4 or a 5, I mean, that rotation is fine. We saw some good things from Reese Olson. I thought the rest of the rotation surprised this past season in some ways.
And you've got some really strong bullpen pieces too. Alex Lang was, a really strong closer this year, but you got a Will Vest and a Tyler Holton was great. And a Jason Foley was good too. So there's enough to be excited about. And I think Maeda, you're right. It almost like calms the water a little bit when I assume we're going to get some high tide in Detroit this year. That's off of Lake Erie. I think Lake Erie. I don't know. I'm a Midwest guy. I got to know the Great Lakes. Okay, here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to give you the preseason win total that was given to these teams by BetMGM. I'm going to give you their end of season win total. If you want to calculate the difference, you can. I'm going to try and do it off the dome. I feel like it's going to be somewhat easy.
Whoa, yeah, that'd be impressive, man. That'd be impressive.
But we're going to cite why they went over, why they went under. I was thinking maybe we do letter grades on the season. We can kind of decide if we want. I feel like that will be a little tough.
And I was almost thinking like at the end, we almost can highlight superlatives in terms of who was the most surprising, who was the most disappointing, because it's so hard to dish out a letter grade because it's going to be dependent on expectations, and expectations were kind of subjective. I know we're mentioning the line, so it could be, then it's almost the opposite. Then it's not subjective at all because you're basing it just on how far they were off from their preseason over under win total. So I feel like just maybe highlighting who the biggest surprise was, who the biggest disappointment was, and then anything in between probably it makes it the easiest.
Yeah. And I was thinking like, okay, it gets a little complex, especially when you look at a team like Tampa, where everybody dropped to injury. Like they lost their entire starting rotation.
Yeah.
And Wander Franco, obviously you had shit hit the fan there, but they still, greatly overperformed. So do they get a better letter grade than
exactly.
Baltimore?
It hurts my brain.
On the division. It's really hard. So let's jump in with Atlanta. This was very easy. The Atlanta Braves, their win total before the year was set at 95.5. They were expected to win the division. They were 9 wins better than that. They won 104 games this year. Each of the three of us had the over 95.5. So a clean sweep on our end. Golf clap for us. Thank you very much. Just a couple quick notes on the Atlanta Braves. The LA Dodgers had the second highest team OPS in baseball at 795. The Braves were at 845. They were 50 points better than any other team in baseball. The Dodgers had the second most team homers in baseball, 249. So no other team in baseball, aside from the Atlanta Braves, was over 250. The Braves were at 307. So more than 50 home runs, 58 more home runs than the next best team in baseball. They did all this with Fried and Kyle Wright combining for 21 starts. Fried had a 2.5 in 77 innings. Kyle Wright had a 7 in 31 innings. What Atlanta did with so many questions in the starting pitching department and relying on Jared Schuster and Dylan Dodd, who both drastically underperformed this year. I mean, like, it's hard for me to point to why they did it, but I could just say Acuna and Riley and Olsen and Albies and Harris and Arcia and Murphy. Like, it's everybody with the stick. It's Raisel Iglesias. It's Pierce Johnson after the deadline. I mean, dude, like, everything went right for this team.
You missed their best player. Forrest Wall slashed 462, 533, 846 in 15 plate appearances.
How many bags?
How many bags? He had 5 bags.
Yeah, he's fast as shit.
I bet you that I don't have the Fangraphs page up. I have the whole Braves reference table up, but I'd venture to say that was probably like 0.8 WAR, F4 there.
I'll tell you
something close to that. That's a crazy 15 plate appearances by Forrest Wall. He also had a homer and a couple doubles. But no, jokes aside, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with them slugging their way, to success. But I don't think people realize that, like, how much they slugged to overcome a lot of pitching challenges, like you mentioned, because I think the Braves were so good all the time that we almost forgot how much adversity they went through on the mound. And I think it's fair to say that they went through plenty of adversity on the mound. You have Spencer Strider for the whole season. That's great. You have Bryce Elder for the whole season, who you didn't even think you were going to be counting on. We were kind of assuming he'd have one of the back end of the rotation spots and see what happens. We didn't think he'd end up being their pretty much most reliable starter at some point, and ending up being the guy who made the second most starts for them. But you only had 14 starts out of Max Fried, and then you mentioned Schuster and Dodd both being duds for them. I think was a worst case scenario. And if you told me going into the season, hey, Fried's only going to make 14 starts and Schuster and Dodd are going to be unusable, like they're going to combine for a near 7 ERA in 18 starts, I'd be like, oh shoot, the Phillies won the division. I would not believe that it worked out the way it worked out. I mean, we're talking about fast tracking a 19-year-old, then newly turned 20-year-old prospect and AJ Smith-Shawver to the big leagues to help tread water at points. Alan Winans made 6 starts. Michael Soroka had to be like shoehorned into the rotation and really struggled and wasn't even really looking that great at points in AAA. Like, they had to piece it all together and try to figure it out. And I think it's pretty remarkable that they were able to just hit their way through these challenges and piece it together. on the mound. It's a testament to Anthopoulos and it's a testament to the team. I know they disappointed, but from a regular season perspective, they were as impressive as we've seen in a while, all things considered.
I'll be honest, they did what I was expecting the Blue Jays to do this year, where there were starting pitching questions, but the offense was going to thrive like no other offense in baseball. And that's what Atlanta did. Like, I was not anticipating starting pitching questions coming into the year. Fried has been finicky the last, it always kind of seems like there's something up, especially this year. There were a bunch of different flare-ups, and I'm a little worried. And it's always kind of been in the back of my mind, like, hey, why have they not extended Max Fried?
There's something there, man.
Because
there's no reason. Like they must not have a ton of confidence in his ability to stay on the field, as you're kind of alluding to, right? Because again, he was awesome, 2.55 ERA in those 14 starts, but yeah, he just continues to have all these little nagging injuries here and there, and you wonder the team that is just so quick to give a Spencer Strider a pre-arb deal. Yeah. And I know it's cheaper than what it would have costed to extend Fried, but at the same time, it wouldn't have been that crazy with the years of control, with Fried being a later bloomer, right? He's already set to hit free agency pretty late. I think he would have been fine with guaranteeing money now and giving up some years on the back end and just making that his one big league contract. It's interesting that they haven't done it yet. And I think this is going to be a really big year for him in a lot of ways. And I think it's mostly just, can I show that I can throw 180, 200 innings again? Because we've seen that in the past. But, with a healthy Max Fried alongside Spencer Strider, I felt like we didn't get to see that Batman and Robin, right? And see almost if it could be Batman and Batman. We never really got to see that consecutively. And that's terrifying on one side of things in terms of if you're the rest of the NL East, but it's also frustrating on the other side of things. If you're a Braves fan or just someone that wanted to see what this team could look like if it's clicking on all cylinders.
For sure. Last thing on the Braves, how valid do you think the idea is that they're going big fish hunting after that, bummer for 5 guys thing? I don't think it's totally valid. I think Nola was probably the guy that they wanted. And we know that they extended a pretty hefty sum to Aaron Nola, and he took a little bit less money to stay in Philly. I wonder what the fit's like for a Blake Snell or for a Stroman. Like, does that make them that much better? Snell would, obviously, but they're not in the Yamamoto sweepstakes, it doesn't seem. Like, it's tough for me to think that they're going to shell out $150 million for a pitcher this year.
Yeah, I wanted to talk myself into that, and I'm not counting them out of Yamamoto, which in most years I would fully just be like, they're not doing that. I think if they were in on Nola for that price, I think they'll try to get Yamamoto probably for somewhere around the 200 mark, and then someone's just going to beat that, right? Like someone's just going to give more than that. Right. But I could see a Sonny Gray or somebody like that being of interest. A lot of sense. Because you have Ozuna and Ozuna now all of a sudden, it isn't amazing the fluidity of the sport where Ozuna is this immovable contract that we were talking about. Like, do you even swap that for Avi Garcia? Like, would the Marlins even do that? Like, that was something that was discussed, and that's crazy. And now it's like, oh, he hit 40 home runs and $18 million a year is a fine deal. They have a team option for 2025 for $16 million on Ozuna. And like, there's a non-zero chance that gets picked up. Again, just shows you the fluidity of contracts and just the sport in general. But after that, that's a lot of money coming off the books, and all their other deals are mostly pre-arb and never getting that high in average annual value. I do wonder if they surprise us with just one big contract, knowing that they don't really have any others looming for a little bit. But I think they end up just kind of collecting a bunch of other surprising or sneaky good additions, right? Like, people see the rosters spots getting opened up and they're like, oh, they're swinging for the fences. Heck, man, they might just go get a Michael Brantley, and that's a good move, right? That's a guy that sneaks in and is a good piece for them, and is much more valuable for a win now Braves on the 40-man roster than a Braden Shoemake. That's kind of where I see it. I feel like they're just opening up spots for all of these really solid role player veterans, and then maybe their big fish is a Sonny Gray. If they do that, I think we're going to be talking about the Braves the same way next year, and it's just going to be a matter of health.
What do you think a Sonny Gray deal looks like? I close my eyes and I see 3 for 65.
I think he gets more years than you think.
Really?
What is he now? 33?
I think he's 34.
Maybe 34. I think he finagles a 4th year out of there. I do.
You think he gets 4 years, 80?
At least he might get more than that, man.
He just turned 34.
Just turned 34. I could see like 4 years, 90.
I would love
95.
that. Okay. Yeah. Listen, Sonny would be a great Atlanta Brave. I think everybody knows that. So it would be a very fun one. The Mets. The Mets had the second highest win total in the National League East. Coming into the year, MGM had it at 92.5. They had 75 wins. So doing the math, that's 17 shy of expectations. I don't need to sit here and say, Pete Alonso, had an 820 OPS. He was slightly disappointing. No, that cat had, 40 homers, drove in 120. He was not disappointing. Lindor had a 30-30
Awesome.
season. Imo was awesome. Kodai Senga was awesome. It was simply the back of the rotation. I could argue that the back of the Mets rotation was the worst back of a rotation that we had in baseball this year. Peterson, Carrasco, McGill were horrible. And then a couple of offensive guys jump out. But to revisit it, you had the over, Peter had the over, I had the under 92.
I was wondering why you had such a voice inflection as you're like, but to revisit it,
but
I had a feeling that was the case.
But I win, you lose,
yes.
And I win.
Yes.
My offensive disappointments here, and tell me if I'm missing anybody. McNeil was the biggest one by far. Jeff McNeil had an objectively bad year for that guy, fresh off an extension.
Yep.
The other two for me were Beatty and Vientos.
Yep.
I needed those guys to be better, and they were not. Eduardo Escobar, we knew Eduardo Escobar was a sitting duck in this lineup. I wanted Beatty over him on opening day. But, man, getting so little production from Beatty and Vientos hurt.
I felt like the Beatty disappointment compounded to Eduardo Escobar being a disappointment, because Escobar was really only a disappointment because Beatty was. That it caused you to have to demand or ask for more from Escobar. So that side of it is extremely disappointing. I think the fact that Beatty was unusable is something that they were not prepared for, and I was not prepared for. That was something I did not expect.
Yeah.
Francisco Alvarez was great. You get a rookie catcher hitting you 25 bombs and playing decent defense. And I know that batting average wasn't there. I don't really care. He's a 21-year-old rookie catcher, put up a 721 OPS. I'll take that. I'd go Beatty as disappointment number one for me, also as just a prospect guy. McNeil, all things considered, with the extension and everything, very disappointing too. But at the same, with that same notion, if everything else was working, McNeil within a 711 OPS playing all over the diamond, you're not like, oh my gosh, get this guy out of the lineup. Starling Marte was, oh my gosh, get this guy out of the lineup. And I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, given that he had double groin surgery. And I don't even dream of knowing what that feels like and how difficult that is to come back from, because I feel like I need double groin surgery after my flag football game I play. Like every time I get out of a chair, I feel it on both sides. I can't imagine trying to play through that. And he obviously just wasn't right. But that was a guy that was one of the worst hitters in Major League Baseball with no defensive value. And his speed no longer was a factor. I mean, he was just patently unusable.
Yeah. Have you heard the Filipowski thing? Kyle Filipowski at Duke men's basketball. He had double hip surgery. He had both of his hips shaved down this past summer. Like, I can't believe that. That sounds so painful. So a double groin, a double hip. I'm just like, how do you move? And he said there was like a 2-3 week stretch where he couldn't get up off the couch. And it makes sense. He had double hip surgery. Holy shit.
That's brutal.
I mean, Marte was really bad. Vientos, were you expecting more, or were you kind of like, hey, I'm moving closer to out than in on Vientos as an impact bat?
I always liked him as a prospect too. And so I definitely was, and I still think he can be a solid platoon power bat, but I just felt like with Vientos, you weren't really counting on him to, I think, have a central role like Beatty. And I think that was the big reason why I thought Beatty was a disappointment on a different level. Like Vientos, you were expecting to maybe hit some lefties and plug in here and there and be a solid bench power bat or short end of the platoon. With Beatty, it was like, this guy's going to be our everyday third baseman. At the very least, we're just going to shelter him from lefties and let Escobar take those. and it just wasn't that. And then, them paying Marte what they did, there was obviously the Marlins wanted Marte back. There was apprehension to give him those extra years because of the injuries that he's dealt with, and I was surprised that the Mets went that route. But I like the deal because it's Marte's just a great player. But with guys like Marte, it declines quickly, right? It goes from 100 to zero pretty quickly. I'm hoping that he can find a way to get back, but they're saying you might need, another similar type of procedure. I don't see him magically getting his legs back under him at 35, with all this considered. I think Dan Vogelbach was a really frustrating player for Mets fans this year, and understandably so. They expected way more from Dan Vogelbach than I think they should have. And I know hindsight's 2020, but I mean, a Vogelbach Vientos platoon in the DH role. Again, I thought Vientos would be better, but I thought Vogelbach being the bulk of that platoon, meaning that he's going to be facing the righties. I thought that he was a massive failure for them too, because that's not only a guy that only put up a 742 OPS with no value outside of the bat. The DH spot's valuable. You look at the average OPS by position. DH is the highest usually for a reason.
Because they're paid to do that. They're literally paid to OPS. If he was Rowdy Tellez, I think Mets fans are very happy, but he was far worse than Rowdy Tellez.
No.
And both of them were non-tendered, by the way. Peterson, McGill, and Carrasco at the back of that rotation were thrusted into way more starts than I think Billy Epler was expecting them to make. You were assuming full health for Verlander. You were assuming full health for Scherzer. That didn't happen prior to the trades. Jose Quintana was not healthy at the start of the year, and Quintana did look decent enough when he came back. Senga was awesome again. That's 4. So you've got Peterson or McGill or Carrasco filling in that final spot, or Jose Budo if he looked good. But the fact that Peterson, McGill, and Carrasco were all thrusted in and all 3 of them sucked, it was like, man, we got to pack this in right now. Really bad.
And then you hand that off to a bullpen where Robertson was great up until them trading him, right? But outside of that, you got Raley, Robertson, Ottavino was okay, but there weren't a lot of arms that I really trusted in that bullpen either. So you're getting short starts, and then you're getting a bullpen that was a revolving door of a lot of different auditions and guys with 4 ERAs. So that side of it was tough too. But on the rotation side, if you told me Kodai Senga would have a sub-3 and strike out 200, and the Mets would be this bad pitching wise before the season, I'd be floored. Is another one that just shows you again how difficult it is to predict and anticipate what's going to happen. But I thought Peterson and Carrasco stood out as big time disappointments. Of course, Max Scherzer, you wanted to see more, and he definitely is a massive disappointment. But there was some questions there. We weren't 100% sure what Max Scherzer we were going to get this year. But the fact that Peterson and Carrasco were also unusable on top of that, of course, the Hall of Famer is going to be a bigger disappointment. But I do think it really, really hurt, and it's not that far off when you consider Carrasco at a 6.8 ERA in 20 starts. It's not like he had a 6.8 ERA and they only had him for 8 starts and they're like, all right, we'll go to someone else. They had to keep going with him. They had to keep doing it, even though it was a disaster. And it was the same thing with Peterson. He ended up settling in and wasn't the worst out of the bullpen at times and got the ERA down to 5, but he was honestly worse than that. Like, there was a lot of times where he was looking just like Carlos Carrasco. So you have 2 guys that were like a scheduled loss every time they took the bump. And then McGill at points wasn't much better. So yeah, I mean, the rotation at some points was literally just Kodai Senga every 5th day. Yeah. And that's all you had to really look forward to. And Verlander, at least still holding his own. But yeah, that's rough.
Yeah. The Just Baseball show officially does not know the Philadelphia Phillies. We had so many problems with them in 2022. They go to the World Series. We had 88.5 as the preseason win total. They exceed that. They got to 90 wins. All 3 of us had the under 88.5. The Phillies have our number, man. What was your reasoning behind the under? Because I tried to almost like revisit why I thought they could have gone under. And I guess it started with a Taijuan Walker and the back of that rotation. I did not think that Taijuan Walker was going to keep his head above water. He did. I like Ranger Suarez. I now love Ranger Suarez. If you told me Christopher Sanchez was going to throw 100 innings, Been like, who the fuck is Christopher Sanchez?
Yeah.
And he was awesome.
Yeah.
Also, Bryce Harper's a fucking animal. He had a 900 OPS in 126 games after having Tommy John surgery in November, not
Yeah.
October, November. He turned it around and was one of the better hitters in the National League this year across pretty much a full season. I was just not expecting any of that to happen. So the fact that all of it happened, credit to the Phillies. I'll eat shit.
Yeah. For me, it was the pitching. I just really didn't feel great about the pitching situation. When you look at Nola, who he had a 4.5 this year. Yeah. I know he was awesome in the postseason and looks like a really good piece now, but there was points during the season where we're like, yeah, and this is not looking good. This is kind of what we feared. Zach Wheeler, he didn't even throw that well for his standards up until the postseason. He had 3.6 this year, but those weren't the guys I was worried about. We knew that at least Nola and Wheeler, we're going to hold it down and be fine. And they honestly were worse if you look at the numbers than I thought they would be. Where I was nervous was, okay, what are you going to get from Ranger Suarez? Can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the bump? Taijuan Walker looked like a guy that wasn't going to be reliable. And so if Walker wasn't reliable, as we talked about, to me, I saw 2 out of 5 spots in a rotation that I was extremely worried about. And I didn't know if the bullpen could sustain the same level of production that we saw, the year prior. And I wouldn't say that they really did either. So the craziest thing about the Phillies is some of those concerns came to fruition. Like, it wasn't like I think the bullpen ended up really just going nuts in the second half, and that really helped them. And then they had the nice stretch of starting pitching with Suarez coming back, and Christopher Sanchez, I think, ended up being a huge X factor. The second I saw Christopher Sanchez was to be pitching meaningful innings and, getting a start every 5th day, I was even more concerned about the Phillies. And the fact that he ended up being a guy that turns into 3.44, and if you look at qualified starters by just ERA, if you qualify them at minimum 80 innings, he had the lowest ERA of any starter on the team. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. So it's just one of those years that just doesn't totally make sense. I was worried about the pitching. The pitching wasn't even that great, and they still were way better than we thought. So I will just be picking Phillies over for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I think every thought that I have on the Phillies, I'm just going to do the exact opposite. A couple of guys that performed better than I was expecting offensively: Nick Castellanos, Alec Bohm. They both played better than I was expecting, or they both hit better than I was expecting. The center field jolt from Johan Rojas, I know he was miserable in the postseason, but this guy hit 300 over 60 games, and they needed that so badly. Is it repeatable? I don't think so.
No.
But, they're thankful for the run that he had. And I got to tip my cap to him for that run that he had, because he played excellent center field defense. And again, he hit 300 over 60 games for them. Yeah. So you can't knock him.
I think the one side of it too that really helped them, and you kind of touched on that, is the fact that pretty much every single player on this team either took a step forward or somewhat repeated what they did the year before. Harper, you end up kind of getting that repeat in production, or pretty close to it, that you always want from him. Schwarber, though it was a weird and bizarre and up and down season, he still kind of repeated it in the sense that he hit 47 home runs, and that's what you pay him to do. Brandon Marsh takes that leap, which I thought Marsh was huge. An 829 OPS out of a guy like him, in terms of the speed and the defense and all the other things that you get. If he's hitting like that, if he's getting on base at a 372 clip, you're in great shape. And then for Castellanos to just not be horrible, right? You take a negative WAR player and then forget just getting back to replacement level. He was better than that, and through stints was really good. That helps a ton. And then Trey Turner, we were so excited about that acquisition and what he could maybe bring to the table. And he finally does over the second half. So, yeah, now looking at it in hindsight, I have no idea why we all picked the under other than the pitching. But it just seems like this was another team that was kind of able to piece it together and somehow overcome some sporadic pitching, even though their pitching ended up being a strength for them down the stretch.
And in 2-3 years, we're going to forget that Trey Turner was horrible going into the All-Star break.
No, they'll never let us forget that. Because they're always going to credit the Phillies fans with the ovation that turned it around for Trey. We'll hear about that for a long time.
I will say I'm a big Jalen Hurts guy.
He's the man.
Yeah, he's the man. So I'm kind of buying into all these Philly athletes, except Embiid. I just cannot buy into Joel.
It's not it, and it's just a credit to the fans. How many times do we have to hear about the standing O that they the fact that they were able to create a situation to where like they boo him so much that them doing the bare minimum, which is just like then cheering for their own player, is like, oh, great job. It's like if I'm really mean to you and then I'm just not mean to you and like one day compliment you, it's like, wow, what a job complimenting him. Or I'm like, that's crazy to me. But
I don't know. Isn't that a toxic workplace, right? Toxic workplace is like bad job, bad job, bad job, good job. And then it's like, I want that again.
Yes. Phillies fans are toxic, but they're manipulative, and it's amazing. They successfully manipulated a player.
And that's why we love them, man.
They manipulate, toxic, but it works. And Philly sports are awesome, and I love Phillies fans, so it works. I think other fans need to start taking notice.
Yeah, note to employers, toxicity works. The Marlins, I'm going to open the floor to you. Their over-under was set at 76.5. They zoomed past that, 8 over at 84 wins. Peter had the under. You had the under. I had the over. Again, a win for Jack and only Jack. I'm built different. I thought that they were going to go over for entirely different reasons than they did. I will say that. I'll expand on it later. But I just want to open the floor to you. Why did they perform better than what MGM had them at?
Bro, I got no clue. No, there's actually part of me that actually has no clue. Yeah. But if you want my most analytical and like honest answer, I think it was a decent bit of luck.
Yeah.
A decent bit of positive regression, a decent bit of players taking strides, and a little bit of Yuri Perez. And you kind of put that all together and you have this overperforming, exciting season. I think if you really took the team at like what they're capable of and you maybe take away a little bit of the one-run luck or whatever it is, this is still a team that's far better than they were the year before. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think the other side of it, and it's frustrating to say now, and I feel bad for Marlins fans that have to like bring it up, but I do think that the moves that Kim Ng made were a big reason why the win total ended up going over, because this was a team that in the first half, there was so many things bouncing the right way. You have a rookie manager that would make moves and it would work out perfectly and Skip Schumacher at times. You basically felt like they could come back in games. They would somehow nail down a save with AJ Puck standing on his. It just seemed like all these things were not going to sustain. They go red hot into the All-Star break. And then we remember how bad things were in the second half. I think if Kim Ng doesn't make any moves, this team limps to the finish line. They finish with a high 70 win total. Yep. And maybe they still beat the Vegas over under, but they're not making the playoffs. They're not doing what they did. So I think it was almost this team overperforming, Kim realizing like, hey, this luck is starting to dwindle. Oh shit, our luck's running out. And she goes out and makes a couple big impact moves to go get a Josh Bell and go get a Jake Berger. Who, like, you talk about their numbers as Marlins, pretty remarkable. I think that's what really ended up putting them over the top. You had luck and then you improved the ball club. And didn't let that luck fully go back down to the norm, if that makes sense. And you settle at 84 wins.
I entirely agree with you on all of it. I think going into the season, the reason that I pegged over was I thought Sandy was just the best pitcher in baseball, and he was going to do it again. But Yuri Perez was going to show up and be a serious contributor. I thought Jazz Chisholm was going to play a whole year and make that leap to superstardom in his video game cover year. And I thought there was a chance that Garrett Cooper played the entire year. Because if he plays 140, then like this guy can be productive enough. Literally one of those things happened. And it happened for 19 starts in Yuri. Like Sandy was very not good this year. We figured out he wasn't healthy. But the guys that I point to, and it's like, hey, why did they win 84 games? I tried to attack this from an individual basis. And I said, Braxton Garrett, Yuri Perez, Berger and Bell, Skip Schumacher, and Andrew Nardi and Tanner Scott. Like those two, we got to give some credit to Nardi and Scott because they were good all year. Puck was the best closer in baseball for the front 2 months, and then he fell off the face of the earth. David Robertson, after the trade, was the worst closer in baseball. If they don't have Nardi and Scott, they don't win these one-run games. Simply put, and they won so many one-run games.
That was going to be my part too. Was, I mean, you and I would just text about Nardi and Scott. We've talked about them so much, just in terms of who would have thought that these two lefties, especially Nardi, a guy that we saw in Biloxi, like I'm pretty sure when we went out down there, he was pitching in relief at double A, for the Marlins, and
that's
this
like
guy was one of the most
break. Like Nardi was our piss break inning.
Yeah, literally. Like Yuri's out. I don't care. All right, we're gonna go. Yeah, go to the bathroom. Like that literally was what it was. Like wasn't paying attention to him at all. Not really on my radar. He was good, and then once he got up to the big leagues, I had a tweet I think 2 years ago when he was getting shelled, saying Nardi will be a good reliever for the Marlins, and I got dunked on by Marlins fans because he got shelled literally that day, and I was like, I'm telling you, this stuff will play and whatever, and obviously I had to bring that one back up, but. Nardi was one of the most used arms, right? You got 63 appearances from Nardi and 74 appearances from Tanner Scott. Those guys combining for 137 appearances for 100 and what would that be innings wise? 45 innings. Do I have that right? 145 innings. Like that is remarkable. That's two lefties out of your bullpen combining for a full starter's workload almost, and also being put in all of these high leverage situations. Tanner Scott, I thought, was arguably the most valuable reliever in the sport. If you combine the leverage, usage, just in terms of how often he was going maybe 4 outs compared to some of these other guys like Josh Hader who refused to do it. I thought there was so many things about what both of those guys did that there's no way this team is sniffing the playoffs if it weren't for them. And then I love that you brought up Braxton Garrett because he could easily get, I think, overlooked. And obviously when you look at a team, there's a bunch of different guys that contributed and helped. Luzardo taking that leap overall this year, I think obviously helped. But you were kind of hoping that. We've talked about Luzardo being this guy. Braxton Garrett being a legitimate number 3 starter, like a legitimate big league 3, was huge for them, especially in a year where they weren't filling out the rotation completely. That's why Yuri had to get fast tracks. I mean, that's why we saw Brian Hoeing make 7 starts. And Johnny Cueto still end up being used for 10 starts and 13 appearances. Like these were all things that were not really, we were hoping wouldn't be the case after a month or two of the season. So I think Braxton Garrett has really proven himself to be a really reliable, really steady arm. And for him to be able to give them there were stretches where he was giving them more quality starts than anybody else every 5th day. And that's not something I was expecting.
By the way, Johnny Cueto had dinner next to him in the Dominican Republic in San Pedro. He had a chilled bottle of champagne on ice next to him at a place that just does not do that. So shout out Johnny Cueto living his best life. Yeah, I mean, Braxton Garrett was awesome. Last guy that I wanted to ID. Also, I feel like we're contractually obligated to say Luis Arraez. So shout out Luis Arraez for hitting 350. Jorge Soler playing 140 games. That was a difference maker for them. Soler had an 850 OPS in 140 games. They needed a middle of the order presence so badly. They got it from him. Nass.
Yeah. I'll say the last thing on that, they didn't have one guy hit for 20 home runs other than Jorge Soler. So the fact that he was able to hit them 36 bombs, right? You're looking at Jazz Chisholm at 19 and Brian De La Cruz at 19 for the next highest total. He gave them power they desperately needed up until adding, Berger and Bell.
Is Jazz Chisholm a Marlin for the entire year this coming year?
So from a pure baseball standpoint, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for the answer to be no. And I think Peter Bendix is maybe the most likely hire in terms of making him movable. Like Bendix is the type of guy to not give a shit. He was a Ray, right? Like he was the Rays GM. He will trade you. He traded Blake Snell. He'll do that. He doesn't care. So that side of it's interesting, but also if you have your owner breathing down your neck saying, no, you can't trade him. When are we ever going to have an MLB the show cover guy ever again? When are we ever going to have a player that's marketable? You can't trade him. I can see both sides of it, but from a pure baseball standpoint, I bet Bendix is very interested in doing that. So it's just a matter of whether his owner will allow him to, I think.
My other question is like, what about like try and take me into the mind of Bruce Sherman, the owner? What about Jazz is like appealing to be, he's not playing. That's so
he's not playing. Yeah, I'm with you. I think there's a certain tipping point where it's like, okay. And I think Bruce is getting there where he wants to win. I think you're seeing that through what happened with Kim. I mean, he just wants to change things and he wants to figure out the player development side. And he's starting to get a little uneasy, which is good and bad because when you're still not willing to fully open the wallet, that could just result in a lot of over managing. And we saw that with Loria. So I hope it's not like that. But Yeah, I mean, what is Jazz giving you at this point? And there's been questions about some of the aspects of his availability and whether some of that could have been helped by how he works to make himself available.
Ethic,
So like those are all things that I know he started to pick up on at the end of the season. They talked about that, him getting there earlier, doing more maintenance for his body, training a little bit harder and doing different things. But I don't know if Jazz Chisholm is a face of the franchise kind of guy. I think he's a really fun, most entertaining face of the franchise. But in terms of leading your team and leading a new era in an org, I could understand if the Marlins felt like he might not be that guy for them. And I just wonder what his value is, because it's a really interesting case.
I still feel like it would be sky high.
Yeah. I just think a team so depraved of offense, they got to roll the dice and hope that Jazz can give them a healthy 162. But the reality is, if he can't give them 140 next year, I don't think he ever is.
This is last chance for Jazz, I do think.
Yeah, to shake off the kind of Buxton type. Yeah, or the Eagle type of label where he's going to be good. You'll still get a couple WAR out of him, but he's not a star that's going to play enough to be someone that you can build around.
Okay, is Byron Buxton a star?
He's capable of being a star. He'll give you stretches of stardom, but he's not a star that
on the star thing. He's not a star.
Well, he's not. He's not. He's not a star. He's not a star that you build around. He's a star talent, and I think that's what Jazz is heading towards.
That's crazy. Like Jazz and Buxton, man, I just can't call them stars. Last one is Washington. Washington, the over-under was set at 59.5. 59.5. They had them losing, 103 games? 71 is where they got. So that is 12 better than what MGM had them at. Peter went under 59.5.
Yeah, I don't remember this too much. I actually do. It's starting to come back to me. Literally, as I said, I don't remember. I remember Peter just going through doing the thing where he reads the entire lineup and he's like, "You think this team's winning 60 games?" And like, I hear him on that. The guys we're going to talk about, I don't think we totally expected to do what they did. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, I thought that they were going to be a 70-win team. I just thought that the number was too low. I thought
they were going to go 62 and 100, if we're being totally honest.
Yeah, we said, and I think, again, it's coming back to me. I think we just said, this isn't the Oakland A's. And Peter's like, yeah, it is.
It might be. Like, yeah, and we were like, no, dude, that number's too low.
And I kind of hear him, like it wasn't that far off, but there was just too many pieces that were capable of not being terrible,
right?
Compared to a lot of pieces in Oakland where it was like, what are you even dreaming on there? Right. There were certain guys where it's just like, you knew what you were getting at best. With Washington, you could dream on a little bit, right? We could dream on what CJ Abrams could give them, and he ended up giving them a really good season, especially in the second half. Yep. We could dream a little bit on, what they could get from Elaine Thomas, because we saw flashes at the end of this last year, and he gave them a really good season. I think those sides of it were interesting. We could dream a little bit on Mackenzie Gore. He wasn't consistently awesome, but shit, Oakland would have killed for Mackenzie Gore last year. So things like that, I think, really helped the Nationals fight out of the league's basement.
For sure. So my thought going into it, I guess, was, we were under the assumption that Joey Meneses and CJ Abrams could net positive in this lineup. I wasn't sure that Lane Thomas was going to net positive, but he was way more than netting positive. Lane Thomas was a great player this year for them. Relatively speaking, he was a great player for them. Overall, he was a good player. Dominic Smith was not a DFA candidate reliability. Dom Smith was worth having in the lineup for the entire year. Again, different. Candelario being there before the deadline was huge for them. They won a ton of games when Jamer was playing his ass off. And the guy for me was Josiah Gray. Ship was like leaving the port on Josiah Gray for me before this year. And now it's back, and I'm boarding. I think this guy, I don't think he's a low threes, but I think this guy can give you a mid to high threes and 30 starts. Not on a year in, year out basis, but a 3.9, I think that shouldn't be the expectation, but I think he's got that in the tank. When going into this year, I did not think that he had that in the tank because his fastball was getting freaking annihilated before this year.
I mean, there were stretches where he was like one of those guys where if I was looking to like place a bet, for on a baseball game, Yeah, I'm looking at the MGM lines. I'm seeing, Gray's pitching. I'm fading him. Like there was points where it was a guaranteed 3 to 4 home runs every outing. It was because that fastball was getting racked. I loved Gray as a prospect, and it was really surprising to see him struggle last year. I mean, when you go from giving up the most home runs in Major League Baseball and the most, I think, walks in the National League to the numbers that you just mentioned and being a really serviceable starter, like being a mid-3 to high 3s guy on a horrible team goes a really long way, because usually those horrible teams don't even have one of those guys or have one at best. But I really think CJ Abrams was a big X factor for this team too, because he set the tone in a lot of ways. They're just being able to give them a little bit of power, second on the team in home runs, but then also being one of the best base stealers in the sport, improving defensively. And if you remember, I think we talked about him when I wrote that piece, kind of breaking down that second half breakout for him. And if you haven't seen that, you can check that out at justbaseball.com. If you search, I think if you search CJ Abrams, you'll be able to find it. But what I thought was interesting about it was Abrams has that huge second half, and that was after Candelario was shipped out. So he took over that kind of main guy in the order and that consistent production piece outside of Lane Thomas. And I think kind of really replaced what was Candelario's production in the second half. And then, dude, Lane Thomas played like an all-star. 28 homers, 20 bags. I know that the WAR wasn't totally there, and that's probably because of the defense, but I mean, he had a really nice season through stretches, and they just pieced it together and were serviceable. Stone Garrett also gave them a really good 89 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Like I look at this team, I look what they have coming into this year, and if it's set at 65, like that's a very hard one for me to pick, but 59.5, that felt way too low. And I'm glad that they proved that it was way too low, because there are some exciting guys, and there are some exciting guys coming, through the system. There aren't many, but James Wood, very exciting. There are, a couple of pitchers that could pop out.
Now, Dylan Cruz will get there quick. He'll get there quick.
Brady House might get there quick, and House had a great year in the minor leagues.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's enough to be excited about, as opposed to the Oakland situation where it's like, oh my God, is this ever going to get better? Oakland and Kansas City are the two that I look at, and I'm like, are we sure this is going to get better? Washington, I do see a path to them being a 500 team, which is not good, but it's a lot better than the Oakland and KC situation.
You don't have to change the channel when it comes on, right? Like there's nothing worse than when just the team is so unwatchable that you'd rather just watch a different game or just watch a different sport.
And I really only think there's one team like that in Major League Baseball right now, because Kansas City, like, I want to watch Bobby Witt Jr. play baseball.
100%. Really, and when Vinny's healthy, I want to watch Vinny. And yeah, no doubt, I'm interested in that team. I think Oakland's really the only one where I don't give it a shit at all. And the White Sox might be there when we start the season. The last thing I'll say on the Nats too is I think there's better days ahead, because look, I know they're not going to spend with the best of them, but they've shown to be more than comfortable giving out some of these big deals. They've gone horribly, and I think they might make them a little bit more apprehensive, but it doesn't mean that they're going to go from spending, they shelled out $385 million for Pat Corbin and Steven Strasburg. Bad deals. Doesn't mean they're never going to spend again. I don't know what the financial situation is going to end up looking like with Strasburg, given all of the things that are going on. But even the end of that deal is in 2026. So you backload a deal, you're probably fine. Pat Corbin's on the final year of his deal, and I know the Nationals are very excited about that. $35 million in 2024, then cleared off the books. They really don't have any other financial commitments outside of $5 million to Keibert Ruiz and arbitration on other guys. So I think the young players are going to start to be up there at that point, and then we're going to see the Nationals finally be able to reinvest some money and go get some pieces. And I expect them to be good by 2026. I expect them to probably be good by 2025 and at least be a pretty competitive and fun team.
Are you ready for the I'm Coming Home music video of Juan Soto when he signs his $500 million deal?
Oh my gosh.
It's the LeBron thing. He goes away, he grows up, he comes back, and he wins one for his city. That's the Soto thing.
Could you imagine if that happened without him? So the fact that he would just be traded and hit free agency and then sign with the team that basically he thought he'd never go back to because they didn't think that they could extend him. Like that in itself would be I think one of the best things that could happen in baseball. Bounces to two different teams that thought they might extend him, never did, in the Padres and whoever else he gets traded to, and then settles right back in Washington. I would love that, but they seem to always just extend or sign the wrong guys. And
Correct.
unfortunately,
It's
that's
never
why
going to
Soto
happen. But it would
no.
be the best baseball spin zone ever if Juan
Oh,
Soto was in a lineup with C.J. Abrams, James Wood, and if Hassel can figure it out, Hassel, and you got Mackenzie Gore in that rotation.
to get an all-time package because you couldn't extend a guy and then he hits free agency and then you sign him. Yeah, that would be one of the best moments in baseball.
That is Chapman being on the same roster as
Yeah.
Gleyber Torres on crack.
Yeah.
Chapman and Gleyber
Literally.
Torres being on the same team made Cubs fans pull their hair out moving forward. But they won the World Series, so it's okay. All right. I think that's it, right? That was the NL East. We're going to have the NL Central for you on Wednesday, NL West on Friday, and then American League next week. I think it'll be Peter and I on Wednesday. What do we got going? Great stuff and an exciting card-centric announcement on the call-up coming this week, which is great.
Yeah, for our card folks out there, definitely check out stuff on the call-up. We're going to be working with Topps to be highlighting Bowman 2023 draft, which is coming out in December. So if you're looking for stuff to add to your Christmas list, definitely go check that out. But I'm going to tell you what cards to go after, everything about the product that you need to know. And we're just excited to be doing these Topps sports card prospects related kind of segments on the call up. So look out for that. And a lot of really fun stuff on the prospects front there as well. Really good interview with Victor Scott, who was a blast Cardinals prospect who stole 95 bases. One of the more insightful conversations I've had. So check out the call up for a lot of fun stuff. And then editorially, the Just Baseball team is crushing.
Yes.
Absolutely crushing the off season and getting you primed up for winter meetings, free agency, potential trades, anything and everything you need to know that could happen, has happened, or we think will happen is being covered right now on justbaseball.com.
Yep. College football playoff. Give it to me and then we'll say bye.
I think everybody's slightly vulnerable this year. But what four teams?
What four teams?
Would be Michigan, would be Georgia.
Okay.
It would be, who am I missing? Could Ohio State still sneak in there?
They could. Winner of the Pac-12.
I think Florida State. Florida State.
Okay, and then winner of the Pac-12.
Ew. Yeah, so Washington.
State, you think Florida State, you think Washington's going to beat Oregon again?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And then you think Florida State's going to beat Louisville in the ACC championship without Travis?
Yes. And I also think that if you base a decision on the playoff predicated on the fact that they don't have their starting quarterback, the Ohio State precedent has made us unable to do that ever again because you had the starter down, you had the backup down, you had the third string down. We said, what the hell are we going to get for Cardale Jones? They won the Natty. So you can't ever pretend to know what to expect from an 18 or 19-year-old. I'm all the way in on them being able to go. And if the Seminoles are able to go, they're going to find a way to win that game against Louisville. They looked like crap this past week. I know that FSU didn't look great either, but Louisville just lost. They're not playing for much anymore. I think FSU's going to be able to figure it out.
All right. Every other link you need is in the episode description, and we will talk to you on Wednesday.